Okay, so we are back, but this time with something new. So for those of you who have watched the Circle videos, I made about 8 videos for the Circle of Knowledge, which was this infographic on the Circle. It's on the channel, and it's a representation of all of human knowledge in a circle organized by scale via physics through language and math. And it's overlaid with the 4 elements, the 4 seasons, the Roy G. Biv, and a bunch of general correspondences that show you, human nature represented on this infographic of all human knowledge. And there's 8 videos up on that. And over the years, I turned that academic system. One of my big interests was also gaming at one point, and still is at different ways or different levels. But I had said, okay, I was always interested from a kid, like card games or Dungeons and Dragons, and how do you create your own game system, right? So here, what you're looking at here is now something new. We're going to call this like Circle Game Video 1. And again, I don't know what I'm going to say about this yet. I just I'm doing it on the fly. So bear with me a little bit. But this is a universal game system developed off of that academic Circle of Knowledge infographic. And I started the Circle of Knowledge infographic arguably between 15 and 18 years ago. If I really go back to my first thoughts and instances of it, it was about 18 years ago. And over those first 3 years, some of the stuff took a while to get concrete. It was doodles on paper and other things. And this probably started, a year or two after that. So this is a year or two. So after the first 3 year session, and I got a lot of it on paper, within that year or two is kind of when this thing started. And I started doing variants of this along the way. And as I would update the Circle, I would update the Circle game. And at one point, I developed a whole board game off of this and had it on a website, but I can't maintain that website right now. So I had it all out there for free as I was developing it. Maybe I can get back to that at some point. I'd like to, or at least I still want to pursue developing the system I have and creating this universal system, and probably the game to go along with it, since I have a ton of material. I spent about 2,000 hours or 2,500 hours somewhere on there on it. But in any case, let's talk about this Circle a bit. So this assumes now that you're familiar with that other Circle on my channel, and I'll reference back to that a bit, the academic system. I think actually I could pull it up and go back and forth. Maybe if you bear with me a minute. I don't know, on the OBS thing I use to record this, I can set each source, but I don't know how it lets me switch between them. If I copy the other, give me a minute, I might have something that would help us here. And I'm doing this on the fly, so let's go up to here and copy this here. I'm doing something in my files. And let me see if this works real quick, because this will make the conversation more interesting. So if I hit left or right here now, does it show up? Oh, there we go. So there's the Circle that I was talking about for the other 8 videos that we made just about the Circle of Knowledge here. And so now we're going to talk about the Circle game system. This is a universal system that I was developing off of all of human knowledge. I said, well, if that's how human knowledge is, and that's how I like to organize it and find it very handy, and I find a lot of really, really interesting generalities that come out of it by organizing it this way, then I said, well, my game system should reflect that. If I'm going to create a character creation system, I want it to be the same one that's creating our reality and create, in a sense, and how I map it and see it. So here we've got this universal game system. And so in the middle, you see the colors of the circle, just so you could correspond back to make that easier for the mind to, make that jump right there. And I don't even know where to start talking about this. So the way that this works is the first thing that transitioned from the academic part to the universal game part is the elements. That's the common thread that kind of ties it together. So you have your elements here, earth, fire, air, all that. We've been through it. And then you'll see on this chart, the elements on the inner circle are the same. Here's earth, here's fire, water, air, light, dust, life, and steam. the same elements that we have around here. And, you know, I have the window set, but I don't even know if it's catching this on the video. I didn't. Let's see. So I'm gonna have to check something else again. Bear with me. And did it change over here? Oh, it did. Good. So it means I don't have to remake this yet. Perfect. Okay. So your elements are the same, and that's going to be the basis of this universal game system, because and I grew up on Link and Zelda and Mario and Final Fantasy and things like that. And, you know, all your magic system, and then eventually games like WoW and other stuff, but your magic system or your D&D system, I played, you know, D&D, you have your elemental magic, whether it was fire and water were some of the most basic ones to start, you know, or something. But here's your elements. So that's going to bring us into this game system here and kind of kickstart where we're going from here. Now, the next thing, so you got your element, and that represents like what magic you're using. Are you a fire mage? Or are you an earth warrior or whatever, right? So that's your element, or your magic, kind of, if you will. And the next thing that was pretty obvious was, and I had switched again, if you look at your earlier versions of this, things switch around. But two other things that came up was, okay, what magic are you using? And the other two questions when you have a game system that you're designing, the first things you say, okay, well, what magic? And what are you? And what do you do? Right? Those are the next two biggest questions. Not that the magic's necessarily the first, but it was my transition from that, because I already had that alchemical side and it mapped here onto the academic circle. It made it easy for my mind to then use all those same classes and thoughts and say, okay, well, we'll start with that. So, but you have your elements, and then you say, well, what are you and what do you do? Well, what do you do is your class. What's your job? You know, are you a warrior? Are you a mage? Are you a whatever? What are you? A thief? Some of the earliest games were rogues and mages and warriors, right? So what do you do? And what are you, though? Like, or what are you? Are you a cat? Are you a human? Are you an alien? Are you a beast, you know, or some other thing? Are you a spectral creature, or a tree thing, or what are you? So what you do is your class, and in this system, I say, well, what you are is your species. What species are you? You know, what are you? But here I kind of use species to go across the whole, not just in biology, but now we've extended it to the whole chart, the whole system. So I have it zoomed in here. On the middle is your elements. And I'm going to skip these other ones here for a second, these smaller words. But then this next ring out here is your class. And then the third ring is the species I was talking about. So we're going to go through these one by one. Or I guess I'll go through the whole circle first, and then we'll get into each ring. And maybe we'll make a video for each ring. Or I'm just going to go at it. Here I'm up to 8 minutes, so I got another 10 or 12 minutes. I try to keep these around 20 minutes or less. So we start with our elements, and I know I'm repeating a bit. Again, bear with me. And you got your classes, and you got your species, and we'll get into each one. And those first three rings were the ones that I had developed early on. And over time, obviously I said, well, what are their traits? You know, like in what, you know, warrior has strength, or what are their skill set or their abilities, or based off of what's I can't think of the word I want right now. What skill do they have, or what trait? In any case, you see that ring here where it's like intelligence or strength or stamina, your stats. Thank you. I don't know why my mind wasn't coming up with the words. Your statistics. If you play a D&D game, you know, what are your stats? So you have your element, you have your class and species and your stats. And I eventually connected a land type to each one. And it's kind of like, well, where are you from? You know, if you think about it that way. So this is the basis of the circle. And now we can talk about each of those rings. So let me see if we get my time. Okay, we're still really good. So which one do we want to jump into first? I mean, the element ones are self-sent, make sense, and that's the magical abilities. I guess let's just go outward and see, like I was kind of, let's start talking about where they came from and then what the stuff on the outside is. So I guess I'll say that real quick first. So once we learn all of what's going on here in the middle, I took stuff just from common games or things that you would already be familiar with, and I asked myself, well, where would these characters live in my system? So I could get a sense of what type of characters overall, before we learn how to use these wheels and this grid. I just wanted to associate. I said, well, where would the things that already exist kind of go? So on the outside, you'll see things like Dragoon or Beastmaster or Warden or Druid or Battle Mage or Witch or whatever. And these are a lot of the things that you would see if you're playing any kind of video game or game with characters or a character creation system. Where would they live in my system? And I thought that would help make it clear what kind of things are there. And it would also help me see patterns and generalities, or see if my system made sense or if things ended up all over the place or what. So that's the stuff on the outside, is just traditional classes or characters and where they would be. Okay, so first I could also say, I thought of something to talk about. These different rings, you'll see how they're aligned. Like the elements, in this case, we brought right over from this chart here, so they're in the same spot. Earth is in earth, and fire is in fire. Earth is in earth, fire is in fire. But then I had to ask myself, when I was developing these classes and species and the character stats and whatnot, how did they most closely align to the information that was already over here? And so that's why you'll see that some of these, like the elements are here, but you'll notice that the next thing, the classes, are kind of off by a 16th. Or a different 8th, if you want to think about it that way. But, so water would be this slice, but warrior would be this slice. So if you think about it in terms of the original circle, water is the psychology slice, but warrior is the neuroscience slice. And then like the biology slice would be life and stamina, but see, the warrior splits part of that. And so, okay, so I wanted you to get the idea that these other rings are offset a bit by a 16th, or that they are a different 8th. Checking my time. Okay, good. I'm going to keep this one a little shorter by a minute or two. I said that last time, and I still got the 22 minutes on a lot of these, but okay. So let's see. We're just going to jump right in, and then I'll stop it in 5 minutes or so from now, and I'll make another one. But where do we want to go with this? How do I think about it from here? So, okay. Yeah, well, again, I'm doing this on the fly, and so now I'm going to say, well, I want to talk about these elements, these other bits in here a bit first, and the classes next, I guess. Classes? Yeah. I think I want to talk about the species next. I'm going to talk about these other elemental words and the species. If I just get through the elemental words, then I'll start the next one with the species, or we'll see. I might do that, because I feel like that's a good starting place. So let's just talk about the elemental words here a little bit. Well, I'm second guessing myself because I'm thinking about something. I was like, oh, no, it'll work. It's not going to matter. I'm just going to jump around a bit, but so, in some of the other, I mentioned in one of the other videos about the circle that some of the other type of systems and elements, there's other systems than 4-tier systems of earth, air, fire, and water. There's systems that have things like metal and spirit. And if you look at some of these other traditional systems that exist, and I wanted to capture some of those words, or I felt like, okay, mine's based off the traditional 4, but those other words still exist and they have to fit in here somewhere. And so over time, for whatever reason, at one point, I not only had the elementals and 8s, because I was trying to come up with these in-between words like dust, light, steam, and water, life. What did I call like the secondary elements, because the primary 4, the original 4. And over time, I had these other words that kind of ended up being the tertiary or third level elemental stuff that came up. And it made sense for the game system to keep it or to include it. And because I'd been pressing my mind to find things like between dust and earth or between dust and chemistry. And I've done so much wordsmithing, combining different words in my head and trying to figure out which ones are the average of words in sound or in meaning or in different ways to make it all kind of fit. And so if you think about what's back here on the circle, this is your meteorology or material science or geology or environmental science, recycling, things like that. And if you think about how the atoms and matter and material starts over here at the beginning of Earth, this was Earth. Ore, the word ore fits really good in here as like the resource or the material that's connected between dust and earth in kind of essence. So this third element system has the word ore here. And then as you get more towards life, earth and life is like moss. If you think about algae and mosses and lichen and things like that, those are some of the first forms of life where you're starting to go from just the how do I create life in a bottle thing I was mentioning. Was it called Miller's experiment or something? It's been a long time, but you're going from the inanimate to life, and that's moss. And moss creeps along slowly on stuff, and it's beginning to move. It's beginning to be able to move itself and grow and spread out, propagate. Again, those words like we talk about on chemistry. I'm not going to stay under 20 minutes in this. I know I'm going to go over now that I'm getting into these. But this is transitions, and you get into growth. So, okay, and maybe I can keep it fast. I got to finish up in 2 minutes. And I can finish quick and then start on the next one and just get back into them more and then go from there. That might be a good way to do it. So you get the idea now. So I won't spend as long on each one, but life and water, the water of life or the life water is the blood. And that makes sense. And that's animals. And plants are about moss, and ore is about, well, we'll get into what's over here with shifters and stuff. But that area was material science. And blood is about animals. And that's the water life. Okay, that makes sense. And then what's the water steam? That's kind of like the alcohol or the wine. I thought wine was... I was trying to keep the words the same feel, too. Like keep it short since... And rogues are about wine, and humans are about wine. And that's the sociology side, and where you start to get into occult stuff and politics, and which is a little bit over here, but metaphysics and stuff. You're drinking wine. Philosophy, you're drinking wine. That's the steam water. Then you've got, as you go from alcohol to something more dense, you got oil. And that's fire and steam. You use oil to get fire and steam. We burn oil. And that's like getting into the human stuff and the crafts and the trades and making energy. And energy is fire. And we're over here across from Earth, and it's fire. And it's energy. Great. And what does fire and oil produce? Smoke. Smoke is like getting towards air, because it's the fire and oil and steam and water that went up into the air. And so you'll see that smoke is fire and light. And light comes through the smoke. And you think of all those images and you realize that you're going from the material substance, and we turned it into a liquid. And now we've turned it into a gas over here. And now we're going back from gas back towards solid. And we're starting the process through condensation and smoke of stuff that we burned, but there's still stuff left, and it collects, and the ash and all that. So there's smoke, and then light and air. Well, now we'll have to get into that a little bit more, but time is a good word that ends up fitting over here, because light is all about time and physics, and you're getting more and more energy. Well, here's the highest energy in a sense, but light and energy and E equals MC squared, and you're coming back towards physics, so you're starting to get to time. And then air and dust is kind of like plasma. Now, dust in this case being the smallest particles, and subatomic particles and things representing you're in the air. And that's kind of like plasma. Plasma is a free electrons, electrons free associating from their nucleus and swimming around in a soup. So, okay, I'll leave it with that. We're hitting over 20 minutes. I'm at 19:45. And we'll pick up from there on the next one. So this is the first video on the circle game, the game based off the circle. And I'm just going to stop short here to keep it short. If you like the video, feel free to comment or ask questions. Thanks for watching. And I'll post a little bit more about this universal game system here in a bit.